Hello, this is Michael Paul, New Orleans Scottish Rite College. I have just returned today from Alexandria, Louisiana. I gave a lecture there for the Louisiana Lodge of Research. Apparently the lecture went over rather well, and I had a number of the brothers ask me if I could make transcripts of the lecture to read later, and a couple of them mentioned doing it as a video. So I thought I'd go ahead and do it now while it's still fresh in my memory. The lecture was mostly about Louisiana Masonic history, and it dealt with the period approximately the mid-1800s, early 1800s. What I've gone over in the past about this history, I touched on a little bit in the lecture, but also I went into some areas that I've not really gone into in any depth with these lectures, and I wanted to cover them a little bit here. Now, as I've mentioned in other videos, one of the facts of life when we look at early Masonic history in Louisiana, or actually early history of the Scottish Rite itself, is that there are gaps and holes in what we know or can prove of this early history. And these gaps and holes can be put into two categories. One is that things that we just don't know, and that can be things that we believe happened or we're partially aware. An example would be the early history of the Grand Lodge of Louisiana, the ritual that was used. The Grand Lodge was created in 1812 by 5 French-speaking lodges. The Grand Lodge itself worked in the French language. Now, what we don't know, while we can say that, we can make assumptions as far as the ritual, but we don't have any ritual from that time that we can point to and definitively say this was the ritual of the early Grand Lodge, or this was the ritual of this lodge, or this lodge, or this lodge. We just don't have this, and it presents us with problems, and one of the problems has been assumptions that have been made and believed and accepted as fact, and these assumptions are without any proof whatsoever. Another problem is when we start discovering things, we'll find things that catch us off guard. We'll see something that is unknown and was not only unknown, but we had no idea that anything like this was around. So it's a double catch. Now, the other problem that we have is context. And that's a little bit deeper of a problem because when we look at things from the mid-1800s, we assume certain things, and many times we'll look at something and we'll try to understand it from our own position today. And when we go back to the 1800s, their lifestyles, their customs may be completely different. And just knowing that something happened doesn't provide us with all the information. We have to know the why of it. And if we don't know why something happened, then we are opening ourselves up to many different opinions or thoughts or ideas as to what happened and why it happened, and maybe none of them will be right. An example might be if you're taking a mathematics class and someone stands up and yells out the number 7. Well, what does that mean? On itself, by itself alone, there's no context. It could be an answer to a problem, or it could be something, maybe a part of an equation. But without the context, the proper understanding of why someone would say this, we don't know what he could possibly mean. And the same is true for early Louisiana Masonry. When we look back and try to understand exactly what was going on, we can think of it as a large jigsaw puzzle. And if we have different ideas, maybe this happened, maybe that happened, and we'll dig, and a lot of times it's very monotonous work, but we'll dig out one little piece of a puzzle, and by itself, it means very little, and we take that and we place it in a place, and we take another little piece of the puzzle and put that in, and soon these little disconnected pieces, which on their own mean very little, add together, we get an entire picture. And I can give you an example of one little piece that was found recently, And my eldest son had something to do with that, finding this. My son was taking a Louisiana history class in college, and he came home one day and he was talking about several of the things that they had discussed in the class. And one of the things he mentioned had to do with customs and traditions that had been practiced in New Orleans, and he mentioned something called calling cards. And he said that everyone had a calling card, from men, women, children even. And he explained a little bit about the proceeding. And when he mentioned that, it brought back some memories. And I started thinking about things that had happened in the past, and we ended up piecing together from this and some past memories and some further research, another little piece in understanding what was going on during that time by how the people lived. And I'll explain it this way. When I joined Masonry, I was 21 and I was still in college myself. And I remember during the summer times, I would take pretty much any job I could get, wherever I could get it. And one summer, I went to work for a past master from my mother lodge. He owned the last letterpress shop in New Orleans. And I worked for him one summer, and we learned all different types of printing from that style, letterpress, hand type, and would set type and do all the different types of work in a letterpress shop. And one of the things I remember, he had one small press, it was a hand press, that he kept over on the side, and he kept it reserved for envelopes and business cards. But he didn't call them business cards. The term he used was calling cards. He'd always say, let's do some calling cards today. I didn't really pay that much attention to it. I just thought it was another word that he used for business cards, and I wrote it off into that. But it was something that was different and odd, and it stuck with me. Now, a good number of years later, in 2011 actually, we had a bicentennial celebration in New Orleans for 200 years of high-grade Scottish Rite Masonry in Louisiana. And we had the celebration at the Royal Sonesta Hotel in the French Quarter. I happened to be giving one of the lectures for that event. During my talk, I mentioned that in the mid-1800s, very near where the hotel was located, there was another very important talk that was given. And that was a meeting between Albert Mackey, Claude Samory, who was one of the ranking New Orleans Masons, and James Fullhouse. And the meeting was concerning Mackey's attempt to get James Fullhouse to join the Southern jurisdiction. He felt that if Fullhouse would join the Southern jurisdiction, a lot of the problems that he was having would be settled. And for this discussion, what they talked about is really not important at all. But what's important was the phrase, a particular phrase that Fullhouse used when he talked about that conversation. He said that Mackey and Samory called on him. And I remember when I read that in his book, I thought that was an odd phrase, and what did he mean by that? But it gave me cause to think about procedures, how things were done in the 1800s. And it leads me to this. This is a business card, and it happens to be my business card. And most everyone today who has a business or works for someone has a business card. Now on this card, it has bits of information. It has the name of the company, and it'll have usually a line or two about what type of company it is. My company is a book publishing company, so I tell the type of books that I have. And on another side of the card, they have contact information. It has my name, my telephone number, a mailing address, a website address, an email address. All of these things are there so that anyone who wanted to get in contact with me can reach me in some way or another. But if you think about it, from the 1800s, there was no telephones. There was no emails or texting or anything like that, websites. There's nothing. So how would someone if they wanted to get in touch with someone, say someone wanted to have a cup of coffee with someone that they knew. Well, if they happened to meet them on the street, they could set up an appointment, let's go have coffee. Or if they wrote them a letter, they could have contact. But in regular conversations between people, if someone mentioned somebody, said, well, let's go visit somebody, let's go have lunch or coffee with them, how did they do that? The only thing that I could think of when Full House said that Mackey and Samary called on him, what that meant to me with my limited understanding of what was happening was that the two of them walked up to his house and knocked on his door. And he answered the door and they visited. What my son was telling me was that this was absolutely not what was done. It was considered extraordinarily rude, improper, and just something that didn't happen for someone to go up to someone's house and just knock on the door. And way they would do this and way they would set up appointments was by use of a calling card. What they would do is it would have their name on it, and it would have usually, if they had a business or a contact, a mailing address that they would have, and they would go to someone's house, and the houses were set up in a way that the front doors were open, unlocked, and they had a little reception room. And I remember this. I lived in uptown New Orleans for a while, and there most certainly was a little room. When you walk in the front door, there was a room there, and it was separate from the other part of the house. And it had two doors. You'd walk in one room on the side here, or you could walk in another room, and both rooms had doors that you could close and lock off this little room and isolate it. And apparently what happened back then, they would have a table in this little room with a bowl or a tray or something. And if you were coming by the house and you knew that this was your friend's house and you wanted to just say hello to him, you'd come in and you'd just drop your card in that little bowl or tray. And that was the equivalent of saying hello. If you wanted to set up a meeting with them, you would take and you'd bend the corner, bend the upper right-hand corner, and you drop the bowl, the card in the bowl with your address, where you wanted to meet, time you wanted to meet, dates you wanted to meet, maybe let's go have coffee, whatever message you wanted to put on there, and you'd leave it there for them. And if the person was able to or wanted to meet you, then they would meet you at whatever time was on the card. But there was a whole social ritual almost for using these calling cards. Learned that even things like if someone in the household passed away, they would come and they'd draw a little black line all the way around the border of the card and leave that. And that would be an expression of sympathy. But all of this was designed to show that there was customs and there was traditions that were used for New Orleans, the social aspect. And Masonry was made up of people who lived in society, and they followed certain customs and rules of that society. And this does not mean that the rules and customs of one area would match another area. And this is where Louisiana Masonry eventually ran into serious trouble. As we've talked about in other videos, Masonry in the United States was created based on a general agreement between the various Grand Lodges. And what these Grand Lodges decided that they wanted to do was that they wanted to have one Grand Lodge per state, and that was actually the birth of what became known as exclusive territorial jurisdiction. But they wanted to have also one language per Grand Lodge, and that would be English, and one ritual per Grand Lodge, and this would end up being the Preston Webb ritual, which is in Louisiana known as the York Rite ritual, craft ritual. Louisiana was the exception to the rule in many regards, and Louisiana was created as a French territory, and it was not just Masonry that was French, it was the entire city when Albert Pike came to New Orleans in the mid-1850s, he came to practice law. And in order to receive a law license, he had to prove that he could read and write in French language. That's how important this was. This was a French culture. And it was not just Masonry that was French. It was the entire culture of the area. But Louisiana, when it became a state, the same year in 1812 that it became a state, the Grand Lodge was created. And a main draw for Louisiana was the city of New Orleans, which was a major port city. Traffic would come up the Gulf of Mexico into New Orleans, but it would also come down the Mississippi River. And they would bring, there was quite a bit of trade that would come down. And when the individuals came down from the Mississippi, many times they were Masons. And when they came into the city of New Orleans, they did what most Masons do. They'd go visit a lodge. Now, Masonry and elsewhere in the United States was designed that it would be almost carbon copies of each other. And this was by design. Each one would be sovereign and independent. But their idea seems to have been that when you visited a lodge in one area and you went to another area, the Masonic experience would be just about the same. And you would have the same Masonic experience from place to place. It would be the same language, the same ritual, and the entire experience would be generally the same. When they came to New Orleans, however, the 5 French lodges were there, but very soon afterwards, these 5 different lodges, they ended up growing in number and becoming 5 different languages. We had lodges that were soon created afterwards that were working in French, in English, in Italian, in Spanish, and German. So when individuals came into New Orleans and they'd go visit a lodge, they might end up in any language of a lodge. They could have multiple rituals. So there was a good bit of confusion with the Masons when they were coming into New Orleans, and they didn't know what to expect from a Masonic experience in New Orleans. And it first became confusing for them. And this confusion eventually developed into frustration. And the frustration developed into anger and then hostility. And they began to get conflicts between individuals because there was this feeling of, why are you different? Why are you doing things that's not done elsewhere? And from the Grand Lodge's standpoint, they didn't understand why there was a problem. This was the Masonry that had been done the whole time. But there was growing animosity between the English-speaking Masons and the non-English-speaking Masons in New Orleans. And a lot of it had to do simply because they didn't understand that each one had a different culture. And they felt that this culture was a difference in culture was bad. Anything that is different is bad. The same is good. And it was creating more and more problems. And the Grand Lodge realized that there was problems going on, but it had a more European atmosphere and attitude towards it. It had the idea that the Grand Lodge should exist in one place and the lodge is there, and the Grand Lodge shouldn't interfere with lodge business. They were there for the big picture, but not necessarily for the day-to-day operation. With the hostility that was obviously growing between Masons and lodges, the Grand Lodge wanted to, on one group of them, wanted to do something to solve the problem, but a larger group said, let's just wait and see. Maybe things will develop, maybe things will work themselves out, maybe we don't have to step in. While it seems that the Grand Lodge had this decision or attitude or desire not to directly involve itself in the business of the lodges, it seems that in the mid-18 or early 1830s, situations developed that forced their hand. Basically, what happened was there was an English-speaking lodge and a French-speaking lodge, both of them under the jurisdiction of the Grand Lodge of Louisiana. And they became so hostile to each other, and the anger and the animosity between these two lodges had grown to such a degree that by lodge resolution, these two lodges broke fraternal relations with each other. Well, that forced the hand and caught the eye of the Grand Lodge, and they realized that they had to step in, and they basically says, well, what are you doing? You're both under our jurisdiction. You can't break relations with each other. So the Grand Lodge basically voided these breaking of relations resolutions, and it realized that it had to take some sort of action. So the action that the Grand Lodge decided to take was they would begin a supervisory role over the rituals. And at that time, there were 3 rituals that were being worked mainly by the lodges, and so they officially recognized these rituals by way of creating a committee within the Grand Lodge. And this committee they called the Chamber of Rites. And what it was a supervisory committee for the then 3 rituals that were worked by lodges in Louisiana. It was the York Rite, the Scottish Rite, and the French or Modern Rite. And the idea was that they would have 3 subcommittees or chambers, one for each of the 3 rituals, and these committees would be made up of individuals who were felt to be proficient in each of the 3 rituals, and they would act as supervisors for the various lodges. So the Grand Lodge was satisfied. They felt that this was a progressive thing to do and something that would help out problems that may develop because of these different lodges. And the Scottish Rite lodges said, yes, we'll work with this. The French Rite lodges also. The English-speaking York Rite lodges, however, they went nuts. They said this is absolutely not helpful. It actually makes the matter worse. Well, the Grand Lodge became frustrated, and they said, well, you know, we're trying to reach you. What do you want? And they said, we've made it clear what we wanted from the beginning. We want one language, English, one ritual, Preston Webb. That's it. They wanted the Scottish Rite lodges, the French Rite lodges, and all non-English speaking lodges purged from the Grand Lodge. Well, the Grand Lodge says we're not going to do that. We've always worked. We're trying to include everybody. We're trying to be as accommodating as we can for all the different languages. And in fact, we have Masons who have been here for many years, who have spent their entire Masonic career in lodges who do not speak English. They speak one of the numerous other languages that we work in. And this would mean that they would no longer be able to attend lodge, or they would have to be expelled. And this is not going to work. Well, the Grand Lodge shut down this idea, and they said that they were not going to consider it. So the English-speaking Masons were in a position where they realized that they did not have the clout within the Grand Lodge to effect change that they wanted. But they did have leadership roles in some of the lodges and other bodies under the jurisdiction of the Grand Lodge. And so they began a tactic, and it was basically in 2 sections. And it was really, when you look at it, clever, and it was very successful, and it was also very un-Masonic. What they were doing was they'd set up on one hand programs for reward and punishment. And what they realized was that the vast majority of the rank and file Masons in Louisiana didn't really have that much to do with Grand Lodge Masonry. They had their jobs, wherever their employment was. They'd work, they'd come home, they had their family, and that was their main focus. And on lodge meeting night, they'd go to lodge. And they were concerned with the lodge experience and their family and their jobs, and they were not really concerned or knowledgeable about what was going on around. They were focused on their immediate concerns. And so these people and these Masons did not have preconceived or many preconceived ideas or opinions one way or the other about anything. So by having this program of reward and punishment, basically what it was dangling a carrot in front of the Masons. And they said, if you do what we tell you to do, what we want you to do, you make us happy, you'll get rewarded. You'll receive degrees, positions, offices, appointments, all these things which are good. But if you make us happy or unhappy and you don't do what we want you to do, you're not going to receive anything. Well, to the rank and file Masons, this was effective. They said, well, if we want anything, we got to do what these guys want. So that was one aspect. The other aspect was they realized that there were individuals that they couldn't bribe in this way. These were individuals who were already in the Grand Lodge, or they already had positions, and they were not influenced by this type of activity. So for these individuals, there was a very clear and persistent practice, and it was character assassination. They would make every opportunity to say what a terrible person this guy is. This one's terrible. Oh, he's doing a terrible job. Oh, he's done. And I've read books and documents and papers from the mid-1800s, and I've read a lot of these things that went on. And the truth is, I've felt physically sick. I've seen things that were published in newspapers. Now, of course, there was no Twitter or anything like that at that time, the internet. But they would publish things in newspapers that was absolute falsehoods. And the Grand Lodge, I've seen Grand Master and Grand Lodge come out and say, no, that's not true. But this is the type of activity that was going on simply to crush the other guy. It became an attitude where it was no longer, I'm right, you're wrong. It was, I'm good, you're evil, and I will do anything there is to crush you. And I will destroy you because you won't do what I want you to do and the way I believe things are done. Now, by the mid-1840s, the Grand Lodge realized that there was a serious problem going on, and they were basically caught off guard and unprepared. Now, there's an old philosophy about when you do battle with somebody, and that is if one person is willing to do anything there is to do, and you're not willing to do the same thing, the chances are you're going to lose. And this was the position the Grand Lodge was in. The Grand Lodge, one grouping of them, one section was saying, we've got to do something. We've got to deal with these UnMasonic Masons. They are doing things that are absolutely not only wrong and things that Masons don't do, but they are undermining the entire integrity of the Grand Lodge itself. But there was another factor that didn't want to, no, let's just wait. Let's don't do anything. We don't want to cause problems. Maybe it'll go away. Maybe we can still work things out. Well, this indecisive nature and this failure to come together caused the Grand Lodge to basically split. The English-speaking Masons were not split, and they ended up pushing through and creating a position where the Grand Lodge realized that if they didn't negotiate with this group, who by this time had created their own Grand Lodge, and it was certainly a clandestine Grand Lodge, but it was gaining popularity, and it was gaining popularity based on falsehoods. People were listening to what these Masons were saying, and they said, maybe they're true, maybe it's right. Maybe this is the way the Grand Lodge is really bad. Let's go with these guys. And the Grand Lodge of Louisiana was in a position where it was about to fail. And so they felt the only reasonable thing that they could do, or responsible thing, is to merge with this Grand Lodge and see if they can save something of the Grand Lodge and bring it together. So in 1850, these two Grand Lodges met and they did merge. But it wasn't really a merger. It was basically a takeover. And the old Grand Lodge was taken over by the new Grand Lodge. And when you deal with people who will do anything, it didn't go well. And this was when, prior to this time, past masters in Grand Lodge of Louisiana all had votes, voice and vote in the Grand Lodge. Past Grand Masters had voice and vote in the Grand Lodge session, as well as the elective officers. And this was changed. Past Masters lost all voice and vote. Past Grand Masters lost all voice and vote. Past Grand Masters was felt to be the blame for everything that happened. And so they were doing things that were, best you could put them, mean-spirited. They passed a resolution that all past Grand Masters, prior to this takeover, would lose the honorary most worshipful brother. They would be reduced down to worshipful brother. And things were going bad. The lodges were being told that you would lose everything unless you would. The only way you could survive is if you were English speaking and York Rite Preston Webb ritual. Finally, the Grand Lodge, the old Grand Lodge, unified and said, no, we've got to do something. And the ones who had been, no, let's wait, they finally woke up, but it was too late. Things had already happened. Everything had changed, and it was too late for them to act. So what happened was they were locked. They began all-out war with each other. And the Grand Lodge of Louisiana was that close to complete failure. And the only reason the Grand Lodge did not fail and was not completely annihilated was because an event happened that no one could have predicted and no one could have foreseen, but it changed everything in the direction of what was going to happen in Louisiana Masonry. In the early 1850s, a yellow fever epidemic hit the city of New Orleans, and the entire senior Grand Lodge line of the new Grand Lodge, the English-speaking Masons, caught yellow fever and died off. So just like that, the entire leadership of one section of this was gone. The Grand Lodge was basically in turmoil. They didn't know what to do, what would happen, or what they were going to do. The senior past Grand Master was John Henry Holland, who was a sovereign Grand Inspector General under the jurisdiction of the Supreme Council of Louisiana. He stepped up. He says, I'm taking control. And he restored all past Grand Masters to having a voice vote and the honorific of Most Worshipful Brother. He tried to work with, there was enough elements of the new Grand Lodge that he couldn't change everything, but there was a lot of give and take. And he was able to save what he could and keep the Grand Lodge from complete failure. So he worked as an intermediary between the two sides, saving what could be saved and putting up with making the best of whatever situation they were forced to live under. But this was based on the concept that we can do anything we want and you can't do it, and there's nothing you can do about it. And the basic problem is everyone is not alike. And this was the main stumbling block, trying to make everyone alike, trying to make everyone like alike, and the Masonic experience the same everywhere. And one of the sad facts, at the very beginning of this video, I mentioned that there are holes and gaps in what we know. And we now have clear evidence, and we can say with certainty that one of the tactics that were used by this new Grand Lodge was to destroy records. Many of our old records are gone because they were deliberately destroyed. They had things in there that they did not want to deal with, that did not support their position, and so they were destroyed. So that was then. What we're finding now, we've just found the 1850 proceeding. We found another proceeding, missing for years. we still have many things that are missing and completely no idea where they might be located, if they can be located anywhere. But there are, bit by bit, more pieces of the puzzle coming together. And we are beginning to understand more of our past. And when we're doing this, it's building the entire picture that we can understand exactly who we were in the past. And we'll have more information which will help us for tomorrow. Now, what we could do tomorrow? What's our future for Masonry in Louisiana or in this whole country or anywhere? We have the ability to do whatever we want to do. We can see our future and guide our future as we want it. If we don't want to do anything, we don't have to do anything. But what I've noticed over the last few years is that there is a growing number of young Masons who are coming in who are not at all satisfied with hot dogs and minutes. They want the Masonry. I've seen so many young Masons, and it doesn't matter what type of lodge you have, but they want to learn. They want to understand what is so special about Masonry. And they know that there is something special, and they know that what's not being given needs to be given in the lodges. They know that there is Masonic education there. They know that there's so much more to the lodge than what they're seeing. And it's the same thing with Valleys. Scottish Rite Valleys, they know that there is so much more in the Scottish Rite than what's being given. And they know, they recognize when they have little cliques and groups, and they work together, and they basically entertainment, social clubs. They know that there's so much more than this. And so these young Masons who are so hungry, they're either going to be driven away or they're going to be given the opportunity to learn and to lead through learning. And we may see great changes, we may see conflicts, we may see a lot of things in the future. But if we are who we say we are, I truly believe that we have a bright future ahead of us. As long as we understand what happened in the past, what's happening now, and what we can have if we choose it. Thank you for watching. I hope to see you soon.